Hello, everyone. It is Micha Green, DC editor. I am super excited, honored, humbled to have this really important conversation with the great leader, Reverend Al Sharpton. Um, as you guys know, he was on our show in August talking about the Get Your Knee Off Our Necks March, which I was at. You see, I got my shirt to prove. And it was really, really a powerful event and day and movement to talk about the things important to Black history and really current Black livelihood, particularly the Voting Rights Act and police brutality. Today we're talking Triumph, the 11th annual Triumph Awards. And so before we even get into the nitty gritty, Reverend Sharpton, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, thank you. I'm feeling great, busy and working, and that's the way I like it. So very happy to be with you, and always happy to be with Afro, and very happy to see your T-shirt.
Well, we are happy to have you with us today. And I rock this t-shirt all the time. I want people to know, I'm a reporter. And so I know I'm supposed to have a level of professionalism and a lack of bias, if you will. But this event was really important to me. I went out with my cousin who came from Detroit just to be there. I was there all day. I got tons of footage, talked to great people who traveled long and far. And, Reverend Sharpton, truly thank you for ensuring that event happened. It was so necessary. It was so encouraging. I have to say, one of the highlights, other than your speech, which was excellent, was is that Yolanda King?
Yes, yes.
She's great.
She's fantastic, and she was the highlight for many of us. I think the highlight for me was her and the families. To have the families of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Jacob Blake and Ahmaud Arbery and all of them stand there where Dr. King stood and bring us the examples of why we're fighting. I thought it was a special day.
It truly was a special day. But before we shift gears completely and go into the Triumph Awards, when you were here last, we were talking a lot about the issues this country faces. We were gearing up for the election season. A lot has changed, but not necessarily. Where are we now? What is NAN doing? What is the state of the world, particularly for Black America, now that Joe Biden is the president-elect?
Well, I believe that we have won an election in terms of defeating Donald Trump, but we have not won a direction in terms of how we're going to deal with voting rights and police brutality and healthcare disparities. So I think that we have an opportunity, but we have not realized what we're after. We were not after just winning an election. We were after changing the direction of the country. And we need to see the George Floyd Policing and Justice Act passed. It has passed the House of Representatives. It has not passed the Senate. Same thing with the John Lewis voter bill. So we are now calling on the president-elect, Joe Biden, and the vice president-elect, Kamala Harris, who I've spoken with, to sit down and let's deal with where we go from here strategically and get these bills passed and deal with the disparities in the country. And I believe they will, but we are going to hold them accountable. I also want to say this before you shift gears, that I think that National Action Network and Martin Luther King III, and I took the front on this, but it could not have happened without a lot of grassroots groups around the country, including right there in DC, Black Lives Matter chapter and others that showed I think, historic kind of coming together in unity, that we may have different tactics and in some cases different views, But if we can have operational unity, we can get what is necessary at this point in history.
You know, I gotta follow up on that question. I know we said before we shift gears, but I think that's a really important statement that you said, Reverend Sharpton. And we had Michael Steele on our show yesterday, who you know, of course, has had sort of a interesting past, if you will, in terms of the Black community and in politics, but he was super straight up with us yesterday and really, really open. And it was a great conversation. And one thing he talked about or questioned and begged the question was, you know, what is next steps for us? And you talked about the reason that sort of we've had this success, particularly with the Biden-Harris election, and of course with the Get Your Knee Off Our Necks March on Washington, was through unity. And I said, somewhat, I think, from a young millennial point of view, that the last time we had unity that I can remember was when was 9/11, when almost 3,000 Americans died. We've lost 270,000 Americans thus far. Michael Steele pointed out we lost about the same amount of Americans in one day from COVID than we did in 9/11. How can we get unity across the nation versus just organizations like National Action Network, Black Lives Matter, you know, Occupy DC, these people that are coming together? How can you get unity across the nation?
I think that we must show across the nation that all of us, whether we come from different silos, different ideologies, different tactics, we all need to preserve healthcare. We all have people that we love, know, family members, friends, co-workers that have been hit, and some fatally, by this pandemic. We all are subjected to a affront on our voting rights. And no matter who we decide to support as candidates, it will not matter if we have impediments to our ability to vote. We all are subjected to police abuse. And again, despite whatever tactical differences we had, we must be able to correct and hold accountable the police forces. So I think if we put the objectives that all of our communities and other communities would agree on, the objectives, and not lead with just our tactical and philosophical differences, lead the objectives, and then say, this may be my lane to get there, this may be your lane. If I were to leave New York, where I am today, and come to DC, where you are, Micha, today, some may say I'm gonna fly, some may say I'm gonna use the highway and drive, others may say I'm gonna get the train. But the objective is to get to DC. And I think we must keep the objective in mind and let people get to how they arrive and push us to the objective as up to our individual preferences. But understand we all must head to the same place. And then we can be diversified and do whatever we want to do, but we all must get there together because we're all denied together. We're united in our secondary places in society. So we should be united in getting out of a secondary place.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up on this question, and then we're truly getting to Triumph Awards, but I got this question from my boss, the Reverend Dorothy Bulware, who's amazing. And she says the two most important issues we should be watching with this new administration, and what kind of outcomes are you expecting?
Who's going to be the Attorney General? Because that will tell us a lot about how we deal with policing, mass incarceration, enforcement of laws in terms of the private sector and regulation. We must deal with the Attorney General. We must also deal with who is going to be the Education Secretary. We've had for the last 4 years an Education Secretary committed to the privatization of education, when the overwhelming majority of our community is in public education. There must be a reimagining of how we do that and fund it.
Thank you. So 2 years now, awards, 11th annual. Congratulations, first of all, on the fact of 11 years of celebrating Black excellence. But somehow in 2020, we still have a lot to be thankful for and a lot to celebrate. First of all, tell us why you felt like we had to go with the 11th annual 2020 Triumph Awards virtually this year, and what can the people expect?
We are people whose history is full of finding a way, even in the most tragic and devastating times, to find triumph anyway. And those that have been able, even in a year that many of us will never forget for its devastation, they're those that rose to the occasion and found triumph anyway. And we said, even though we can't have the gathering, every year we've had it either at Lincoln Center in New York, we had it in Atlanta twice, and we had it at the Apollo Theater last year, the historic Apollo Theater. We're going to do it virtually because we want people during the holiday season to know that you can find victory and take it out of the jaws of defeat. That is why we were careful to choose honorees that did that. Tyler Perry, not only has he built the first Black film studio in Atlanta that hires over 400 people every day, he's been committed to the cause. A lot of people don't know when I got the call from Ben Crump, the attorney, I call him the Attorney General of Black America, that the family wanted, the Floyd family, George Floyd's family wanted me to be involved and help to do a lot of the rallies and marches and National Action Network to help organize a lot of it, which we did in Minneapolis days after the killing of George Floyd, all the way to the March on Washington that you talked about. I called Tyler Perry and said that we are trying our best to deal with this in a pandemic. He said, "What can I do?" I said, "Well, we first of all need to get the family fortified of George Floyd. But a lot of people don't understand is George Floyd was in Minneapolis alone, no family members. His family was in Houston and in North Carolina. It was Tyler that said, yes, I'm doing a lot of films. Yes, I'm winning awards, but I'll provide private planes to take care of the family. I will do what I can to pay for the funeral." And Robert Smith, the billionaire, Black billionaire, called and did the same thing. George Floyd would not have been sent home to the other side without the contributions and involvement of Tyler Perry. We're honoring him for his great work as a mogul, but that he was not so high that he could not see the needs in his community. We're honoring Angela Bassett through her career, who has shown Black excellence at her best. She could have taken cheaper roles. She could have done things that would have been commercially more advantageous. But she has always represented a certain line of excellence that she would not compromise. We're honoring DJ D Nice. All of us that went through the pandemic will never forget how he started these sessions that went hours, all night, all day, that lifted our spirits, played our music, gave us something to tune into. And he had no idea, and I've known D Nice for probably a decade and a half or two. And he never did it any differently, and he always does it, but he became the safe station that we could see some light in all this darkness. We didn't know what this pandemic was going to do, how long it would last. And everyone from those of us that consider ourselves grassroots to Oprah Winfrey and Michelle Obama tuned in. So we're honoring D Nice for being our comfort in a danger zone. And then we're having Reverend Sarah Jakes, who is one of the outstanding faith leaders in the country. Her father, everyone knows, T.D. Jakes, but she in her own right is a great shiro who preaches a dynamic word of hope and faith and deals with our brokenness. She talks in her sermons about how she was a teenage mother and how she had to wrestle with certain challenges in life. People don't just need people that come through the easier road and the well laid out road. but they need to hear from people that have gone through things like they've gone through, the doubts, the insecurities, the being broken, and yet take those broken pieces and put them back together again and make it anyhow. And that's why we're honoring Reverend Sarah Jake. So it is to show that even in this darkness, there are lights that we can honor and hold up, not because of they need it for their own ego gratification, but we need it to know that there is hope even in the midst of despair.
You know, I think that that message will not only resonate when watching the Triumph Awards on Monday, but I think will really kind of help us keep going as we go into 2021. You know, certainly with the pandemic, we don't know when's the end. But your message of triumph, I know, was far before 2020 when we sort of needed that. Why do you feel like African Americans need a moment to celebrate triumph, not only in 2020, which you broke down, and of course the people being honored, I think, are great representatives of that. But in general, why that word triumph, and why do we need the reminder of that as African American people?
We need to remember that we are in this country because we were taken from the shores of Africa and enslaved. We were brought across the Atlantic Ocean in the mid-Atlantic, in the Atlantic slave trade. What a lot of times we forget, Micha, is that coming across those torrential waters, we were chained to one another. One on our right may have died. They didn't remove them. There was no medical experts or medical facilitators on them ships. They just were shackled to us dead. And we had to ride for days and weeks with a dead body on one side, somebody on the other that may have been sick with some kind of disease. And yet we rode, which means that by the time we got to the shores of the United States to go into slavery, the strongest, the ones that survived the Atlantic Passage, are the ones that are our forefathers. We are in our veins, the children of the strongest Africans that survived the pandemic of the slave trade. So we have no excuse to ever back down, to ever bow our heads, to ever concede to defeat. Setbacks every now and then, but never defeat, because in our very blood is the blood of people that said, I've taken the worst that humanity has ever thrown, and I'm still here. That's who we are. That's our bloodline. We need to proclaim it and face whatever situations we have today.
You know, Reverend Sharpton, I gotta admit, I think I needed that answer for myself. I'm a PK, and I think you can attest to this. You know, a lot of pastors say you preach sometimes sermons that you need for yourself. Maybe I asked that question that I needed for myself. Thank you for that. That was really inspiring. I want to let the people know we only have a little bit more time left. So if you have some questions or comments, go ahead and drop it down. I will try to get to you before the end of the interview. I'm going to try to ask one of my last questions before we wrap. But one thing that has been so interesting to me during this time is that, and definitely I see that also with your awardees this year, is that while everyone's been suffering truly from the pandemic, and maybe it's because I work for the Afro and I'm a Black woman, and so I'm just not as aware, but it seems like those coming to the assistance of the country are African Americans, whether it's creatively, financially, strategically. They look like us. One, from your perspective, Reverend Sharpton, would you say I'm onto something and that's the case? But two, why is it that we, the most persecuted people in this country, are the ones who save the day.
I think because of that strength I just talked about, we are those that have always had to operate against a headwind. We never had a backwind. And we are not as rattled as others because we've always faced some kind of pandemic, social pandemic, economic pandemic. Our families torn apart. Because in slavery, we were not allowed to have families. Mama was sold to one state, daddy another, children another. So we've always had to take these broken pieces and make it work. And I think that when the country has been rattled, and understandably so, by this pandemic, we're the ones that are saying, yes, we're shaken, but we're not rattled because we've got through tough things before and we can get through this. Let's figure it out because we've always had to figure it out. And I think that's why we've been the ones that have stepped to the forefront, because we're the ones that's used to dealing with crisis, because our whole experience at whatever level we are, we've always had to manage through crisis.
Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton. Thanks to all the people tuning in. I want to give a special shout out to some of those who have already commented and said their hellos. First of all, I see that the Reverend Paula E. Clark is watching with me, and that's my mommy, so I'm going to say hi to mommy.
Hi, mommy.
Yeah, see, Reverend Sharpton said hi to you too, Mom. Jewel Wall says, good afternoon. Thank you so much, Jewel. You are always tuning into with the Afro. Thanks for always being locked in and sharing everything that we have. And good afternoon to you. And she says, appreciate you, Reverend Al. God bless you. She's giving you applause. Micheline Gail Holder March says, speak, Misha, mic drop. Thank you for tuning in. Jewel says, hallelujah. Anthony Kennedy, thank you for your question. He says, what can we do to stop gerrymandering from weakening Black political power? Thank you so much, Anthony, for that excellent question.
A great question, Anthony. I think that we must hold the office holders that we vote for and we put in accountable. Because, give you an example, one of the things National Action Network is working on is, where do the developers get their money from? They get them from pension fund investors that are money managers who are mostly white, that give them loans. They're not using their money, the developers. They're using loans from pension funds, promising a return. When you look at unions, government agencies, all of these that we put our pension money in, they take our pension money, give them to developers that then remove us from our communities to build development. In many ways, we're financing our own removal. We need to put people in office that say, wait a minute, we don't want unions, we don't want others to do pension funds that will lead to removal. It must lead to regeneration and to a level of development in our community. Because gerrymandering is an economic decision by those that benefit from it. And we must put the guardrails on stopping that they exploit us by breaking down our communities, taking the prime property, and using our pension funds, our tax dollars, in order to use it against us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And let's see. I'm seeing comments coming through, guys, and I'm sorry if I'm missing it, but you know, when I look down, then they go away. So if they come up before we go, oh, thank you. I'm seeing it on our live. Yeah, we need community finance programs for sure, for sure. I just did a moderated a discussion with Occupy DC about a month ago, and a lot of the panelists were young politicians, many elected officials, and some activists who talked about the public health crisis. You broke that down a bit today, Reverend Sharpton, but somebody in that conversation talked about that term is almost becoming trendy. We're hearing our politicians use it a lot. ones who never cared about gun violence being a public health issue, police brutality being a public health issue, now suddenly saying that. For someone who's been in this fight for decades, Reverend Sharpton, what is your advice to our political leaders who are just now sort of using these terms that you and some of the other activists and leaders have been saying we've been having troubles with for decades?
They should not get into it because it's trendy. They should understand that's why we put them there. When we talk about, we lost this year John Lewis, we lost this year Reverend C.T. Vivian. We talk about people like Amelia Boydton, who was beaten on that bridge in Selma, Alabama with John Lewis. They didn't take those beatings and tear gassing, and some killed Goodman, Cheney, and Swerner. Some lost their lives not for your career development. They did it feeling that if we got the vote and put some of you in office, that you would deal with our problem. And rather than them dealing with a trend or a hashtag or something that goes viral, they need to ask themselves every day they get up, why am I in this position? And why did people sacrifice so much to put me here? They didn't even know me. And I think that we have too many people in positions of elected, or those of us known that are not elected, that act owed a career rather than people gave a path for us to have a career to use to empower others. Otherwise, we do them a disservice and in many ways abuse them for the second time. They did not pay a price for your resume. They paid a price for our empowerment.
Thank you. So I know it's number 7. We're tuning into the Triumph Awards at 7 p.m. We'll be sure to include that link. And guys, for all of our Afro viewers, there will also be an article on this interview, so you'll be able to link to the Triumph Awards that way to watch it virtually. But I know that the Triumph Awards does not end the hard and passionate work of the National Action Network. What's next?
We are definitely going to be holding accountable this new administration. We're going to push this George Floyd Policing and Justice Act. We're going to push the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. And we're going to continue to do what we do every day on the ground, all over the country. Right there in Washington, our Washington Bureau, led by Ebony Rowley, our Washington, D.C. chapter with Sister Nia 2X. We're going to stay on the ground. And even if Biden and others begin meetings as they're starting, we're not going in the White House because we're glad to get back in the White House. It's not what you go in to take a picture for. It's what you come out to deal with what your work's supposed to be. That's why we call it National Action Network, not procrastination, not National Pose for a Photo Op Network. If you don't get the ground moved and improved, then it's all for nothing.
Whew. I love talking to Reverend Al Sharpton. I always leave more empowered and ready to get in on the action, to be to ensure that not only am I talking the fight, but I am fighting the fight. Thank you so much, Reverend Sharpton, for taking this time out. I know you have a ridiculously busy schedule, and the Triumph Awards cannot do themselves. So thank you so much for taking this time out. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap?
I just want us to be safe, take care of our families, but also, even if we have to do a lot of it virtually, keep fighting, keep going, and know that the struggle is hard, but the victory is certain if we just keep fighting the struggle. And I always find time for Micha. It's a bias I have for PKs.
Oh, well, thank you so much. You know I appreciate you always. I hope that at the other end of this, I will get to see you in person again.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, thank you for constantly fighting the good fight and joining us at the Afro as always. You know you are family to us, and we love you so much. So thank you.
Love you, and thank God the Afro through it all has sustained and survived. There are very few people that can say they've been here since the 19th century and still kicking it and keeping it real. Thank you.
Thank you.